Over the years, the Home Office has released various booklets to householders on what to do in the event of a nuclear war. Protect and Survive is the latest of these booklets and would be distributed free to every household in the likelihood of nuclear war. In the foreword it tells us, "If Britain is attacked by nuclear bombs or by missiles, we do not know what targets will be chosen or how severe the assault will be." The booklet anticipates moving people from high-rise blocks and bungalows and caravans into nearby, more protected accommodation. But the message for most of us is that when anywhere is as likely or unlikely to be a target for a nuclear strike as anywhere else, stay at home. But the advice following this contains a veiled threat. If you leave, your local authority may take your empty house for others to use, so stay at home. When the film The War Game was made, however, the government's home defence plans included a policy to evacuate women, children, the elderly and sick away from the most likely target areas to safer areas. Now the policy is stay put. Apart from this, the advice contained to Protect and Survive is much the same and just as ludicrous as it was when the film The War Game was made in the early 60s. Make a lean-to with sloping doors, protected with bags or boxes of earth and sand. Or, if you're unfortunate enough to be caught out in the open, lie flat in a ditch and cover the exposed skin of head and hands. The advice to the public to stay at home is reinforced by government plans to blockade essential service routes in the run-up to war. As the Police Home Defence Manual suggests, traffic problems could be created by people ignoring advice and control of people on foot and by public transport might arise. Advice in Protect and Survive leaves very little to choice. In answer to criticism, the government reply on behalf of civil defence says that it is money well spent if it shows people how they can safeguard themselves and their families. The enormous expense of providing shelters to every family in the land could not be justified. The risk of war is at present considered so slight. In contrast, the system of government which would bring us to nuclear war has prepared very detailed plans for its survival. These plans are not available to the public, but are contained in a mass of Home Office and Scottish Home and Health Department circulars, many of them marked restricted. The simple and unflustered picture of shelter building in summer clothes and Protect and Survive is not part of these plans. Here, the devastation of targets, ports and industrial centres, for example, have a place in the calculations. These circulars are just a small part from the mountain of reports of meetings, notifications of duties of government and roles for local government officials. The smooth functioning of the legal system would not be clogged up with juries or the right of appeal. The country would be in the hands of officials, almost without exception, from local, national and judicial bureaucracies. To make sure the economy was able to work as they wished, these people could order the rest of us about as they saw fit, withholding food to those who do not readily comply. But the great attraction of the post-nuclear world for the civil servant would be the opportunity to start from scratch. And in some circulars, there is barely restraint in the detailed imaginings of an economy ruled by financial advisors drawn from the Treasury and the private sector. In the event of nuclear war, Scotland will get home rule, not from any elected assembly in Glasgow or Edinburgh, but from nearby Kirknewton. The extensive plans for home defence have resulted in a number of buildings for this hidden government. For while the threat of nuclear war is considered so slight that a table or door is adequate for most of us, 6-feet walls of concrete protect the survival of a ruling elite. Here, at Kirknewton, this anonymous and outwardly scruffy building would become the centre for government in Scotland, Scottish central control. Like the plans for home and civil defence, much of the bunker is hidden, extending below ground. From here, some 200 or 300 people, sealed from the outside world, would have absolute power over law and order, the distribution of food, provision of medical aid, over life and death in post-nuclear Scotland. Only one elected representative would be allowed into this secret government to fill the post of Scottish Commissioner, a post at present held by George Younger. Alongside the Scottish Commissioner would sit Sir David Scott Barrett, commanding the armed forces deployed throughout Scotland. Alongside Sir David, Sir Edward Frizzell would administer the surviving police forces in Scotland. Assisting them, senior civil servants from most government departments, chiefs from the fire service, top executives from oil, gas, coal and the electricity industries, from the building industry and water authorities. In addition, a few chosen scientific advisors to analyse data and fallout conditions, and to exercise control of communications, selected journalists to operate a wartime broadcasting service. Scottish Central Control at Kirknewton is at the centre of a web extending its post-nuclear command through Scotland, dividing Scotland into 3 zones. Northern Zone includes Fife, Grampian, Highland, Tayside, Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles. Western Zone contains Central, Dumfries and Galloway and Strathclyde. Eastern Zone is the Lothian and Borders regions. Each zone has its own wartime headquarters. Troy Wood, near Anstruther, is the zone headquarters for the Northern Zone. East Kilbride houses the zone headquarters for Western Zone. And for Eastern Zone, the headquarters is at Barnton Quarry in Edinburgh. The staffing arrangements for the zone headquarters represent a slightly less illustrious group to that found at Scottish Central Control at Kirknewton. Located deep inside the old Barnton Quarry, this former RAF early warning radar station became a government wartime bunker in 1961. Equipped with water, oil, food supplies and its own electricity generator, the Zone Commissioner, Chiefs of Police, Army officers and senior civil servants would provide regional government for the Eastern Zone. Unlike Kirknewton, the Zone Commissioner would not be an elected representative but a civil servant. The eyes and ears of the system, commanded by the Zone Commissioners and Scottish Commissioner, immediately after an attack, are provided by a voluntary body, the Royal Observer Corps. Originally set up as wartime plane spotters, now they have the task of monitoring the nuclear strikes and the pattern of fallout that would follow. Dotted in 872 bunkers throughout Britain, many resemble this one near Turnhouse. In well-protected boxes, instruments to monitor the distance and predict the strength of a nuclear explosion feed information to the volunteers below, who pass this on to the 25 group controls and the 5 sector controls of the ROC. Instruments for detecting fallout and checking wind speeds and direction enable a pattern of drift to be estimated for the highly dangerous fallout as it begins to settle in the first 48 hours after the explosions. The ROC posts are independent of public services, and each is equipped with generator, sanitation and ventilation, so that the crew can survive a long period in areas of high radioactivity. The flimsy telephone line at this ROC post is the weakest link in the chain of communication systems used in the Home Defence Network. Underground telephone cables linking the zone and Scottish controls with important installations within the military defence system are supplemented by radio links to other bunkers and to reconnaissance aircraft. Each regional authority is represented in the command structure imposed from Kirknewton. In Eastern Zone, both the Lothian and Borders regions have wartime headquarters. In Lothian region, Alston House, in peacetime an administrative centre for Lothian region's Highways Department, becomes in wartime the regional headquarters. From the basement, the region's chief executive officer and emergency planning officer would head a team to administer the local government policies dictated through the zones. The secret Lothian War Plan reveals that the peacetime local government departments have already been given responsibilities for wartime activity. At least a dozen employees of the Lothian Regional Council know that they will have a place in the region's basement bunker at Alderstone House. Apart from an unhappy and uncontrollable population, the biggest threat to Alderstone House is its proximity to Torness nuclear power station, which, on completion, would be a likely target if the destruction of sources of nuclear material were an objective in a nuclear strike. With over 600 nuclear missiles pointing at Britain, discussion of particular targets might seem academic. As far as protect and survive is concerned, we are led to believe that we do not know which targets will be chosen, or how severe the assault will be. On the basis of that argument, the minimum of do-it-yourself defence is described for the public. But as we see, the maximum of defence is built for the government and military bodies. During a recent war exercise, Operation Square Leg, the war planners acted out a hypothetical nuclear attack on Britain. 26 bombs dropped on Scotland. All civilian airports capable of refuelling and servicing military aircraft would be prime targets in a nuclear strike. Grangemouth is essential to the functioning of industry in Scotland. The stocks of petrochemicals and the refinery plants would be targets for any aggressor. The wartime government has special plans to deal with energy supplies in the event of nuclear war. Rosyth Dockyard is an important centre for Britain's Polaris submarines. Here maintenance and repair work is carried out, as well as routine inspections of the Polaris fleet. Rosyth receives and dispatches regular shipments of nuclear materials. Road and rail communications would be destroyed by a nuclear strike at Rosyth. Just north of the fort, Petrevey Castle houses a major military command, in sight of both Rosyth and the bridges. Its operations room is protected well underground. The bunker being built here at Petrevey is for telecommunications equipment, essential to NATO's functioning in the UK. Among its tasks, Petrevey is responsible for monitoring the movement of Soviet submarines. Though vulnerable because of its location, most of its important functions would be carried out prior to a nuclear attack. Some staff do have civil defence duties, and from the Petrevey bunker may coordinate provision of air reconnaissance after an attack. Craigie Hall lies on the southern side of the Forth. In the days leading to a nuclear exchange, Craigie Hall would have complete charge of authority over all armed forces in Scotland. Very extensive protected accommodation at Craigie Hall will ensure the survival of many units of the armed forces. By contrast, the people in the city of Edinburgh are not provided for in terms of public fallout shelter. Immediately after an attack, all food stores and shop stocks will become the responsibility of the zone government. Food stores will be protected by the police and military, who will have first call on any resources that survive. While Ewan follows Protect and Survive to protect his family from the heat blast of a nuclear explosion, we can begin to see the double standard that comprises civil defence. We build ludicrous shelters, far less than adequate, and stay home to fry. From the chaos that would follow a nuclear bombardment, the government that had planned and led the drive towards war would emerge from the shelters to implement a programme of national survival. Civil defence is not a plan to provide for the defence and protection of the population. Protect and Survive is a self-help guide, approaching nuclear war protection with less thought than in the construction of a doll's house or tree hut. Civil defence is a programme to preserve a system of government. As a senior civil servant wrote in a lurid Home Office account of his expectations of post-nuclear Britain, in conditions of anarchy, the implementation of measures necessary for national survival would be impossible, and the maintenance of public order would be one of the essential tasks of wartime regional government. Law and order is number one on the list, not food supplies, not medical aid. First, the government must reassert its authority, receive due recognition, and then consider the supply of food and medical assistance. Civil defence is a plan for the protection of government through a period in which many people are likely to be hostile to authority. In fact, some aspects of civil defence planning are already implemented during major industrial disputes. In one example, the police support units, as seen in action in the summer riots, were designed with a post-nuclear role in mind. But, as the Police Home Defence Manual advises, Chief Constables will have opportunities to practice the units in peacetime when suitable policing tasks arise.